Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to call to order the May 29th Planning and Development Committee meeting. And I'd like to remind everybody if you could put your cellular devices on an inaudible mode so as not to disrupt today's meeting. There is two changes to the agenda. One is item 7.4 has been distributed. Actually, it was distributed to you last week, and another copy is before you today. And the other is, I'd like to make an announcement. We'll do it under 5.1 prior to the delegation, and we'll rename the delegation at 5.1A. I'd like to bring regrets from Councillor Sprovieri, who is on other municipal business today. And I haven't heard from the other councillors unless the clerk's office has. Okay. No other changes to the agenda. Would someone like to move approval of the agenda?
We're not at consent, are we?
We're not at consent yet, no. Moved by Councillor Willens. All those in favor? That's carried. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Councillor Dillon, are you on for the consent agenda? Yes. Okay. Seeing no declarations of conflict of interest under consent, Councillor Dillon.
I just want to remove 7.1.
7.1 has been removed from consent. Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a couple of questions about 7.3, so I would just like to remove that as well.
We'll take that from consent as well. Alrighty, would someone like to move approval of the consent agenda as amended? Councillor Bowman. All those in favor? That's carried. There are no statutory public meeting reports. We're now down to the delegations, and prior to our registered delegate, I would like to make an announcement. The College of Fellows of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada, the RAIC, bestows fellowship in recognition of outstanding achievement. Criteria include design excellence, exceptional scholarly contribution, or distinguished service to the profession or the community. This year's recipient was Brampton's own Alex Terrano. This month, Alex has been recognized as one of the most highly respected leading minds and advocates of urban design and sustainable city planning. Alex, a licensed architect, urban planner, and urban designer, joined the city in 2002 to lead the creation of the urban design section. He has been working tirelessly to create a more attractive, vibrant, livable, and sustainable Brampton, to attract and retain talent and better business, nurture innovation, ensure the city's resilience, foster sustainability, improve public health, redefine the city's character and image, and elevate the city's position among Canadian cities. In addition to his work in the Planning and Development Services and Public Works Engineering Department, Alex has been the friendly face of countless tours, workshops, and lunch and learns throughout the city, spreading his vast knowledge and enthusiasm of design and urban planning excellence. He has been a frequent contributor to planning publications, presenter at conferences, and a lecturer on urban design, showcasing Brampton to audiences across the country and internationally. Alex is the founder and director of the Council for Canadian Urbanism and the founder and past chair of Ontario Professional Planners Institute, Urban Design Working Group, and in 2007, he received an award from the OPPI for his professional work and became a fellow of the Canadian Institute of Planners in 2011. Congratulations, Alex. The city is privileged to have a distinguished and passionate professional, a champion for all the causes that make cities more memorable, attractive, and livable. We are so lucky to have you here at the City of Brampton. Thank you. We'll move now to item 5.1. We have a delegation from Barbara Watson, a Brampton resident, on affordable housing in the city of Brampton. Barbara, are you here today? Barbara is not here, but I think for council's or committee's information, staff are working on a report, and it is expected to come in September on the issue of affordable housing. So if Barbara Watson does contact any one of us after the meeting, we can advise her of that. Okay? Councillor Miles?
Staff, then, will you be in contact with the delegation regardless and inform her of that?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, we'll be in contact to confirm what predisposed her from attending today, and we'll advise her of the upcoming report as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is 7.1. It's an applications for permits to demolish 2 residences on Mayfield Road. Councillor Dillon, you asked that this be removed from consent.
Yes, just a question in regards to some of the estate lots. Seems to be a number of, I guess, demolitions. There's certainly talks about converting some of the lands into commercial. So I'm just wondering, well, if I recollect correctly, there was some talks about protecting the estate homes in the Castlemore area. So I'm just wondering if there's any progress on that, if that is indeed correct, or what's the limit point in which we can convert some of these estate homes? Like, can we just keep converting them, or are there specific ones that we can do and certain ones we can't touch? So just general question.
Mr. Waters?
Through Madam Chairman, we are undertaking a review of the Toronto Gore area, and through the official plan review, we are identifying those lots that have the potential to accommodate higher densities, not so much as in vertical development, but more as in ground floor housing, but at more of a suburban type of density. We're going through that review now, and we should have some results for you in the fall.
So will you have a list or identify a certain, I guess, boundary in which you can protect, and those outside of it, that fall outside of it, will those be made public, or is that something you're going to take on that for staff's information only, in which they look at it as a case-by-case situation?
Through you, Madam Chairman, our objective is to identify contiguous blocks within the Toronto Gore area that are suitable for increased housing densities. We won't be identifying individual properties that are isolated or too small to accommodate development, other than a 2-acre lot, but it's to look at larger contiguous properties within the Gore area.
So, but what I'm trying to get at is that you're saying you're going to be identifying some properties. I guess it's part of a larger area, but we'll still be able to see which properties fall in that area that could go towards higher density.
Through you, Madam Chairman, that is correct, yes. We'll have a location map identifying where the potential properties are that can accommodate higher densities.
But what I'm saying, though, is will that be made public, or is
Of
that
course.
for staffs?
Through you, Madam Chairman, it will, yes.
So just to...
Councillor Dillon?
Yes.
This report before us is specifically for granting a demolition permit.
I know.
I granted you a little bit of latitude because I thought that it was in relationship to these 2 lots, but if it's a bigger issue,
No,
can
I'll just conclude right now. The reason why I brought it up is because there's been some concerns about some of these demolitions that have been brought to me by residents. And so I guess we can save it for a later date, but one of the concerns, and I'll conclude by saying, is that if it's on, it might, we'll leave it at that. We'll leave it at that.
Close a loop on this discussion. My read of this report is that these properties are within the Vales of Humber secondary plan, so they already have urban densities assigned to them. So we're not this is not encroaching into the estate area at all.
Fair enough. I was just generally speaking about the estate homes, the estate lots.
Understood.
okay. Would you like to move
Yes, I'll move.
the report? All those in favor? All those in favor? All those in favor? Your hand is up, pouring water. Good. Thank you. Item 7.2 is in consent. Item 7. I'm sorry, Councillor Miles? on the demolition?
Sorry, no. Item 7.3 was in consent, and I
It's
missed.
been
bullet-
withdrawn.
Oh, perfect, thank you.
Councillor Bowman has asked that 7.3 be removed from consent. Councillor Bowman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a couple of questions with this particular recommendation that we've got here. Now, number C, under the number 4C, I guess, it says, shall be subject to the following minimum landscape open space requirements: a 3-meter buffer where the rear yard abuts a floodplain zone. And we're talking about an application or a business that's going to be using, in some cases, I would think, hazardous materials, being auto shop, a paint shop. Is there any special precautions that need to be undertaken or any special permits that need to be issued if they are so close to this floodplain area?
Through you, Madam Chair. The site and the development that's proposed, it will be going through further review that will be associated with the details, further details on really how the site's to be developed through the site plan application process. Really, it's through that application process that we're going to be looking at the finer details on the grading of the site, the way in which it slopes, the details of how stormwater management is really achieved on the site, all the detailed engineering as well. So really it's through that site plan application review that we'll be getting comments from the Conservation Authority, as well as further comments from our engineering staff on really how any stormwater runoff is to be cleaned in advance of it leaving the site in any way. So I understand that really those types of details would be looked at and covered off sufficiently through the process.
Okay, so we'll, at some point, we'll be ensuring that any leaching of chemicals into soil is all taken care of.
Yeah, so staff and the Conservation Authority will be commenting on that, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. Councillor Miles?
Thank you very much. My concern about this particular application is the location that it sits at. This particular location is fairly close to the Bramalea Ghost Station, and it's also in the area of the Canadian Tire lands, which we are going to be having to determine how to develop it. It's just east of the 410. So this is an area that council has raised on a continuous basis when we've had general overall discussions in regards to major arterial roads in the city that we really need to turn our attention to in order to ensure that it has the right kind of zoning and uses on it. And I understand that the application was submitted back in 2016. But this one would be of a real concern to me based on what they're applying for, large tractor trailer sales and parking area in that particular spot on Steeles and Tompkin. I think if we are looking at, if I'm going to say from 410, going east probably to Airport Road, at the different kinds of land uses that we want to see as we move the city forward, this particular one would be of great concern to me. So with council's indulgence, I'd like to refer it so that we could have a bit of a discussion on this, perhaps with the new commissioner and staff, just because of the long-term impacts that this might have on that stretch of Steeles Avenue between the 410 and Airport. That really is an area that I know as soon as we have the time, we're going to be taking an in-depth look at the uses on that particular site. So I just don't want to see this go any further until we've actually figured that particular area out.
Okay. You're asking for a referral? Mm-hmm. Councillor Fortini, do you want to speak on the referral?
No, I just wanted to ask a
I think we can, I'm going to allow that. I don't think that it was Councillor Miles' intent to stifle conversation today.
No.
Councillor Frattini?
I mean, I don't see anything in here that says we need an oil interceptor. Usually where trucks are in oil, in case it doesn't go on our sewer lines.
Yeah, through you, Councillor. Sorry, Madam Chair. Yeah, the details with respect to the oil grit separators or other kind of detailed engineering items that are looked at through detailed review, those will all come out by way of the site plan application process that'll occur after the site is ultimately zoned for the use. So yeah, details such as oil grit separator or slopes and such would not be identified at this earlier zoning stage.
So that'll come in the next, because it's an oil interceptor, it's like 2 or 3 floors deep. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Miles has put forward a motion of referral on item 7.3. Do you have some timelines that you want to attach to that, Councillor Miles? Or we do have a planning meeting next Monday night, I believe, as well. So if you're able to have your questions answered, it could perhaps come.
Well, I'd like to, because I've had a discussion with the area. This is a particular site that kind of overlaps between
7 and 8 and 3 and 4.
7 and 8 and 3 and 4. It's right kind of at the border. But every time we've had a strategic planning meeting or a meeting to talk about being future ready, that section of the Steeles Avenue corridor comes up. So that's why when I saw this, it raised a flag for me.
Okay.
Okay.
Councillor Willens on the referral?
I was trying to get your attention.
Was he?
Yeah.
Thank you. I apologize, Rick.
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Madam Chair, I just wanted to make a point that the requirements for the oil and grit interceptor are Ontario Building Code requirements and would be flagged during our site plan review and identified as necessary for those repair jobs.
Okay. So on the motion of referral, all those in favor of referring the item to a future date? That's carried. Thank you. Item 7.4. Is the report that was handed out. You have a copy of it before you, and it was sent to our offices last week as well. It's Friday. Councillor Palashi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Last week seems far away, and a working day, it's only been a day, so we received it last night, or this morning. Couple questions. There's lots of recommendations in here, and I wanted to dive into. I did get a chance to briefly go through the report, and I see that it does mention that studies have been done in the past. So I just wanted to go through, and in particular, we'll start off with the ARC study.
Do you want to go through them one by one on, is that your plan on item number 2, condition number 2?
That's my plan.
Okay, thank you.
Number 2, the ARC study. First question, is that a provincial requirement? And if so, how long has it been?
Through you, Madam Chairman, it is a requirement of the provincial policy statement that archaeological study be done to conform to that document. And the ministry requires it within 300 meters of a present or past water course.
And how long has that been in place? Like a long time? Or
Well, the PPS has been around since 2005, or actually 1997, I think, was the first version of it.
So not like this year or last year?
I don't believe so.
Okay. And to get more of a, I understand that it's within a water course, and I'll probably ask for a little bit of, if you know why that is, to explain why they require that within a water course. But I'd also ask you to look at the history of that land to see what else, like if there was a church nearby or anything in the late 1800s. Do we know the history of that particular piece to justify if people were dumping pottery or if people were dumping, I don't know, golden doubloons, anything like that? Are we going to find anything?
Through you, Madam Chairman, I'm not aware of the past history of the site back in the day, but typically watercourses such as the Etobicoke Creek, which is a significant one, where natives, indigenous people settled and also new Canadians settled back in the day. So that's why they're identified at a very high priority in terms of any work that is to be undertaken, that a study be done to determine if there's any findings or artifacts in that location within 300 meters.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I guess my last question for each of these would be, has an archaeological study ever been done on this piece of property in the past?
So through you, Madam Chair. So no, staff has really reviewed the details of the previous submissions received, and so no, there is not an archaeological study that we are aware of.
Okay. Recommendations number 3, the environmental site assessment, if required, phase 2. In here, it does state that a environmental impact report was made at some point, but because of new guidelines, I guess you're requesting another one to be done. Can't we just take the old one and see if that one works?
Through you, Madam Chair. Councillor, the report that we have predates what was a change in the regulations in 2009. Those regulations moved away from what was basically a referenced CSA standard for conducting Phase 1 environmental reviews and created something called Ontario Regulation 15304 that referenced specific requirements that were a little bit more stringent in terms of conducting these environmental assessments. So because we're not the approval authorities of the record of site conditions, which ultimately is the goal of conducting any Phase 1 or Phase 2 ASA in these requests, the report wouldn't be accepted by the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change without updating the report to the current standards. So that requirement is an MOECC requirement in order to file the record of site condition for the site.
Okay, so let's say if the applicant had gone to the ministry itself and the ministry was okay with the previous one because it did meet all the new standards, are we okay with that?
If they can get the RSC filed with the existing report, by all means, yeah.
And is that in their court, or do we have to play a little part in that?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, that is in their court. I highly suspect they'll be unsuccessful, but they're more than willing to try.
Because it's the province.
That's right.
You said that. Okay, so it's mandated by the province, and we have no authority to change that under new legislation. What? And I have a difficult time with the fact that, we have the same owners, and yes, it may be new applications, but when does, it's a pretty gray area, and I don't see it being, very black and white. It may be a new application, but it's the same owners. They were always going to deliver something to this parcel of property, and albeit it's a new application, when do we say, well, we give leniency to the effect that, it is the same owners, and we have gone through processes with them before, and they have been before council many, many times, public meetings, and all of that such. When do we say we give leniencies to the effect that, they've been here?
Through you, Madam Chair. In the case of these environmental site assessments, if the Phase 1 was conducted in 2011 under the current regulations, I mean, it's still an old study, but we would be willing to accept that it was conducted under the current regs and therefore would be applicable to the current standards, and they could file the record of site condition using that report. Assuming that between now and then there wasn't something significant that happened on site that we were aware of, right? So in those cases, we have accepted reports that have been prepared under previous ownership or by the same owner but have sat around for 4 or 5 years. But in this case, because the report predates that change in regulations, we're a little bit tied on that, on the ability to do that.
Okay. The functional servicing report. Now, there was a current functional servicing report, and we're asking for it to be revised.
Through you,
Why?
through you, Madam Chair. The functional servicing report was received with the application by the applicant, and staff is just continuing to review it. So ultimately, it's an item that will need to be approved just in advance of the draft approval of the plan of subdivision application. So it's just, staff will work with the applicant on some refinements there too. The functional servicing report is a very necessary document to be reviewed and approved in that it speaks to the servicing of the site. So how sewer and water facilities will be accommodating each of the residents that they're going to be locating here.
So the work essentially has been done, we just haven't had the full time to sit down and review it?
So the staff, through you again, Madam Chair, staff has been reviewing the application, this report in particular. Some revisions to the report, I understand, are needed just to get it to a point that we can be able to approve it. So, as typical, with reports that are received, there's a couple of iterations that are needed of the document itself so that it speaks to things, really well and as to our standards and such.
So for clarity, a lot of these reports have already been submitted and staff are reviewing them. They are just covering them off in the staff report.
That is correct, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Okay. I've not seen a report like this with these amount of recommendations. Usually a counselor puts all these recommendations together, not staff. Next one, the traffic assessment. We'll group the traffic assessment with the noise study as well. Both have been done prior, and I realize that the applicant has changed their application scale. But that being said, I believe those two studies are something that we could have taken from, well, it's going to be less traffic and it's going to be less noise.
Through you again, Madam Chair. So with respect to the noise study, the dwellings themselves are situated in a different manner than they were really zoned for previously. And so given the different site configuration and different product type as well, there's really a technical need to understand how the current proposal really will deal with noise impacts and mitigate noise from the traffic in the area along the roads, Sandalwood and such. So there really was a technical need for that study to understand that the noise levels that will ultimately be received on site, that they will meet provincial guidelines for noise. So hence the need for the study, the submission of it, and really at this point in time, as identified just within the report, that that noise study is really completed to staff's satisfaction now, but there is some more detail that's needed just to understand some specific warning clauses that will have to be put into purchase and sale agreements relating to the product type. So we're working with the applicant on receiving that more detailed study. With respect to the traffic impact assessment, yes, the previous application that had been approved in 2007 or so, it did have more units on the site. In speaking with our traffic staff really about the need for a traffic assessment associated with this application, they've identified that it's really prudent to receive it and review to understand whether the same types of improvements that were previously called out, whether they'll still be needed with this development application. So it's really beneficial to the applicant to understand and really submit that study in order to understand the types of improvements that are needed to the public roads just around the subject site itself. And it's possible that some lesser improvements are needed given that there's less units on the site proposed now.
So what improvements for Sandalwood or Conestoga would have needed to be done for the high-rise that may not need to be done for the townhouse? Give me some examples.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. So it's possible, for instance, and I can't say whether it really applies to this site in a specific way, but right-hand turn lane that really bridges off of travel lane on Sandalwood to allow somebody to turn into this development. It's possible that that right-hand turn lane could now be have a shorter, what's called a throat length, or a shorter taper, potentially. Aside from, I guess, the improvements that might be lessened in this way, it's possible that some additional improvements are needed as well. The one change that has come forward by way of this proposal is the public road system that comes through the site, as opposed to what was previously a private road system that came through the site. And so there's some different really design details that have to be provided at certain locations just around the periphery of the site, at the intersection locations. And so the TIS, traffic impact study, will really allow some of those finer details to be understood better, as well as to really the details which are needed to just construct the physical development and improvements.
So is it necessary, are we saying that they have to really go out and do a complete full traffic study, or is there bits and pieces that they can take from their old study?
Yeah, and through you, Madam Chair, I'm understanding that staff is really generally agreeable to the TIS that's submitted to date, but and one has been received through this application. So it's just some really similar to the functional servicing report that we spoke to. It's another iteration of that study is needed, just to add some additional information, so that really it speaks to all the necessary information. I'm understanding generally through staff, or traffic staff, that really there are items that can be identified by way of the old TISs that can be pulled into the current one, but there's really a need to have that in this document, so that you're not having to really to understand the proper information, really review previous studies, try to understand what elements of previous studies are appropriate and such, so really to consolidate the necessary information into one document is appropriate. So again, the TIS is received. It's staff working with the applicant just on some refinement there too.
Okay. The geotechnical, number 8 for committee. Has this study been done in the past? Would we normally ask for a study like this for a subdivision like this? An infill site?
Through you, Madam Chair, this is a standard request. It feeds into the design of foundations and subsurface for roadways and all of that. So it is a very standard report that we would ask for in any development. I'm not aware that we've received one to date. We have not.
Okay, and it's a standard, as in we always ask for this, every application that comes forward?
That's correct.
We ask for a geotechnical?
Through you, Madam Chair, that is correct.
Okay. Number 9, the decommissioning report.
This, again, through you, Madam Chair, is a standard request. It's quite possible that it's not applicable to the site, and it might be a simple answer from their consultant that there were no wells or private sewage systems identified. Simple as that.
Okay. And then the last one, number 10, is just the provincial on the others to approve site plan approval, right? For the final approval, the plan of subdivision confirmation be received, that a record of site condition be filed with the Ministry of Environment to the satisfaction of you.
That's correct. Through you, Madam Chair. So this is essentially the culmination of the Phase 1 and Phase 2, if required, environmental site assessments. And it really just delays the step of the filing of the record of site condition, so that they may move on with the development application without being stalled by the actual filing of the record of site condition.
Okay. Can we go back to the urban design brief for just 1 second? And is this, the urban design brief, is that something that's normally talked about through, by way of planning and the consultant, and our urban design people here at the city during site plan approval?
Through Madam Chair, no, it is standard for staff to recommend and for committee and council to really approve a prior to recommendation, just in association with a rezoning application, for the design brief to be approved at that time through that rezoning process. Really what that document does is identify for everyone really the intended design of the units, the design of the sites with landscaping and such, the architectural articulation of the buildings, so that we have comfort in knowing when we're zoning the site that the product type and the land use as a whole will be appropriate from an aesthetic standpoint. And so through the later site plan application, there will be refinements to the architectural design brief potentially. And if there aren't really refinements to it, we would just have the understanding then, knowing the details of what's being proposed to the site plan, that it meets, generally really conforms to the principles that were already approved by way of this document. So it is a document that is typically approved by way of the rezoning application.
Okay, and then when does, through you, Madam Chair, when do we plan on having this completed and on to the next phase? And if it's okay with committee, maybe we can ask some member from the consultant company to come down.
We'd have to open the agenda and add them, if you wish to do that.
Just in terms of timeframes, if that's okay.
Well, I'm at the committee's indulgence. With two-thirds majority, we can
I'll move
add
it.
somebody to the agenda. Move that, you're adding Michael Gagnon?
Or
Anthony?
Richard Domes.
Richard. All those in favor of adding Richard Domes as a delegation? That's carried, I think. Thank you. I'll let staff respond in terms of timing.
So through Madam Chair, the anticipated timing and the intended timing really was for fall of this year. We are anticipating that the studies would be reviewed by staff sufficiently to give us comfort across the board that staff could make a recommendation in support of the application really at that point in time. There is some potential for us to be able to have really a recommendation report completed in advance of that, potentially late summer. I know that there's a couple of tentative council meetings identified. There is not any planning committee meeting that was scheduled over the summer, but if there was an ability for staff to come forward in that way, we might be able to do that.
Okay. All righty.
Yeah.
Richard, welcome.
And sorry, Richard,
Do you
I
have
know we
questions
haven't
of the
really.
delegation, or is it?
My questions
Are you
to the
doing a
delegation.
presentation for us today, Richard?
Okay, we'll do a presentation on what you've heard so far.
Certainly. So I guess our concerns originally, once the application was filed and we received comments where there was a number of studies that we thought were either redundant or the timing of which they were requested was not in line with what we had expected as part of this draft plan application. Some of the studies, in our opinion, are more usually requested at the time of rezoning or at the time of the pre-application consultation with staff as part of the draft plan.
Which has already happened.
Which has already happened some time ago, namely the archaeological assessment, which was neither requested as part of any of the last applications in the last 10 years, nor was it requested as part of the pre-consultation submission meeting some time ago. That was something that came through the process, and in our respectful opinion, was something that, if was going to be required, should have been a long time ago. We understand that staff has assisted in providing a deferral as to when that report is going to be commissioned and filed, so that does provide some help, but we were just concerned with the timing of that request and it being requested when it hadn't been in the past. Mm-hmm. In terms of the environmental site assessment, as Councillor Pleshy noted, my client had completed that as part of the previous applications, and that was through their own due diligence as part of filing the application. But we understood that there is some discretion on the part of the city to whether or not they ask for it if you're going from a vacant site to a non-sensitive land use. Typically, I know that it's a harder requirement when you're going from, say, an industrial land use to a residential land use, but in this case that doesn't happen. So as I understand it, there is some discretion. The province doesn't mandate the city to ask for it all the time, and it's up to the staff to then make the request, just as they didn't request it as part of any of their previous applications before this one today.
Okay, and we're not going to allow a debate here. I know that through you, Madam Chair, I know you're going to hold a very composed meeting. There's a lot of history in it, and a lot of members of council know the history on this
Do you
file.
have any questions of the delegation? Because if you don't, I'll ask you to move receipt of the delegation.
I'll move receipt of the delegation.
All those in favor? Thank you, Richard.
I'm not sure, why we wouldn't have asked for something normally where it should have been asked for a file like this. I don't know of any other file that's come through the city of Brampton that there's been, protests at the site, or protests that have marched to Queen's Park. Like, I really don't. I don't know why we didn't ask for these things in the appropriate spot, and why we're asking for them now. And I'll let you answer, Alan, just in a second, but it's very concerning to me that we may be asking for stuff that really may not be relevant, but the applicant is going to have to do these studies, and it's going to cost them money. My main priority here is to make sure that this site doesn't stay during its building process. It stays safe, but not at the safety of what we allow our other infill sites to be at, because we know how they're what the rules we have on those. I think that they're very wishy-washy in terms of I don't know if we say that there has to be 24-hour surveillance at infill sites, but this site I would expect that there would be. For the developer to now have to pay for additional studies, I'm worried that we're not going to get the full attention by way of the developer having to spring for the security, the proper fencing, to keep there's a lot of kids in the Heart Lake area that would love to just get into an infill site because they've probably never seen one. So that's one of my main worries and concerns.
Before you answer, Alan, I'd like to make some comments as the chair. There is nothing about this application that has followed the normal template for anything. So I hope that staff somewhere is keeping a diary, a whole history on this, so that if ever emerges again at some point in the future, you've got something to at least work off of. I think that all parties, both the applicant and staff, are trying to do things rather than, straightforward like most applications. You're doing it sideways and backwards, and everybody's trying how to best understand the best way to move this application forward. So I think it's important, when we talk and we make comments that I've never seen this before. Well, of course you haven't. Why are you asking them for the studies at this point in time instead of that point in time? Well, because this didn't follow the normal road to completion. And I think it's important that those comments be made. I think everybody's doing their best to try and get this forward, to move this forward. Certainly any of us who have been around or understand the emotion with this site understands the need to get it to completion. And so I do want to recognize the efforts of staff with trying to do this, and as well as the applicant. They're trying to do things in a less conventional way, a less normal process than what's generally been followed. And on that, I'll let you comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So maybe just to comment with respect to the archaeological study and the environmental site assessment, which were not identified through the pre-consultation application that we had received. Typically within a with a pre-consultation application, where staff is able to provide really a composite list of all those studies that are needed with an application. And so we had identified some studies being required through the application. We did not identify those 2 studies in particular. Staff was really trying to have really flexibility going forward, knowing that we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We didn't want to ask for studies that were thought to be not necessary because they had been done before. We really wrongly assumed or really misunderstood the fact that the archaeological study had been done prior, when it actually hadn't been. So the archaeological study wasn't identified through the pre-consult for that reason. Us understanding that it had not been done by way of that previous application that had gone to the board a couple of times, it really necessitates the need to have it really completed now. It's appropriate for it to be completed. Really likely would have been appropriate for it to have been completed before, but we're asking for it now for that reason. The environmental site assessments really also, it wasn't identified through that pre-consult, and really I think it wasn't understood that the legislation change that occurred really necessitated the new version of it, and really for that reason wasn't requested. So that said, the pre-consult response that we do put out to everyone, it identifies that, notwithstanding the list of background studies that are being asked for in that letter, that it might be going forward that staff does need to receive some additional studies as are needed in this case. So anyways, just some background for committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll finalize with just thank you for the rebuttal. Thank you for, I know that you've had a long process in this, and we appreciate all of staff's time, and I think Councillor Moore thanks staff on behalf of all of committee. I am going to move the recommendations. I'm going to delete item number 3, the environmental assessment, number 6, traffic assessment, and number 7, the noise study, and move the rest of the recommendations, but delete 3, 6, and 7. And by way of deleting number 3, unless you come back to me and say that it's provincially mandated that we have to have number 3 done, then you can do number 3. But if it's based on what EAs are to be done when you're taking a gas station and putting in a hotel, not farmland and building houses, as far as I'm concerned. EAs are supposed to be done when you're switching a body shop over to maybe offices, but unless you come back and say, sorry, councillor, but the province says that you have to do it before you move on, then legal.
I think,
Through
you, Madam Mayor.
No, Chair.
Chair, sorry, Madam Chair, sorry. I think all we've heard in that regard today is Mr. Domes, who's not a lawyer, saying he thinks that it may not be a requirement. From a legal perspective, I would be very careful as a council to waive anything that's related to environmental due diligence. The issues of contamination are a very real thing for municipalities. If we don't require certain studies, it can affect, if there's a future order, there can be impact. I'm not saying that's necessarily the situation here, but from a legal perspective, my suggestion would be it is reflected in the OP as part of our complete application requirements. Staff are recommending that an updated ESA be provided. The regulation has been updated since the last one was completed, and so I think it's prudent that it be done to protect the corporation. I'm not going to I'm not going to say it's absolutely a legal requirement necessarily, but it's part of environmental due diligence. And there are provisions in provincial policy, such as the PPS, that require a review to ensure that, contamination is not an issue on a site and those sorts of things when you're going through a development application process. This is a fresh application that's been filed. We didn't, it's being reviewed. It's a fresh application. So those would be my comments with respect to the environmental aspects. It's a due diligence matter, and I would suggest that council be careful about, just waiving environmental related matters.
Yeah, it's not a fresh application, and that's the problem. It's not a fresh application. It's been before us for a long time. So what I'll do then is I'll ask that number 3 be voted on separately, and the traffic and noise still be deleted in the first motion that I made.
So asking number 3 be voted on separately, and so you're amending it to remove 6 and 7.
Yes.
Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I'd like all 3 of those then that are being asked to be deleted to be voted on separately, because I 100% agree with staff on this one. I was going to say it. I was going to use the word fresh, but this is a new application. This is not the applications that we have seen on this council and previous councils over the years. And I think it's quite appropriate for staff to ask for a revised traffic assessment. It's not a brand new, that's revised one. And staff have, I think, answered very well that some of the old parts of some of the other assessments can be used within there. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So I won't be supporting deleting any of these recommendations out of this. Thank you.
Councillor Dillon.
I believe it's a new application, and there's been a lot of new population added to the north part of Brampton. So I think my opinion is that we should go ahead with these studies, and I'd just like a recorded vote on the amendment.
Well, okay. I think the best approach is to vote on all items independently. Mr. Clerk? Okay.
Are we doing recorded vote for all of them?
We do electronic vote.
Okay.
If I may.
All those in favor, I'll call it on 3 separate votes. All right? I'll call all those in favor of 1, 2, 4, 5, 8, 9, and 10. And then we'll do 3 separately, and then we'll do 6, 7 separately. Okay?
Madam Chair, if I might just add one
Yes.
item. So with respect to item number 7, recommendation number 7, which applies to the detailed noise study, I just want committee to clearly understand that without that detailed noise study, staff will have an inability to understand the warning clauses that really have to be part of purchase and sale agreements and home buyers information maps to let the residents know which units might very well exceed provincial guidelines with respect to noise. And even if they are maintaining provincial guidelines, there are necessary or really required warnings that have to be put to purchasers with respect to the types of air conditioning units that go onto the site, I guess requirements with respect to the types of windows that have to be on the buildings as well. So it's warning clauses in a variety of ways, all tied to the noise study. Without that study, staff will be unable to provide those due to the prospective purchasers.
Okay, and I think I heard staff say that for any of these requirements, that any reports or studies that have been previously submitted, that you won't be asking for additional work beyond that unless it is required. Thank you. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I ask to do it a little bit of the opposite of the way you just said, only because...
Happy to receive suggestions.
Only because I want to suggest that if we were to approve of all those ones that you just listed out right now, and then go to the 3 that Councillor Pleshy wants us to take out, if those 3 are voted down to take them out, then we need another vote after that to put them back in. So I would think the better way might be to do it is to just vote on the 3 that Councillor Pleshy wants out, and then if it doesn't win, the vote would simply be the staff recommendation.
Although it's not a matter of taking them out, he wants 3 deferred?
Yep.
Was it, Councillor Palashi?
No, 3 just separated.
You want,
Number 3 just separated. Number 6 and 7 deleted.
you want, okay. All those in favor of deleting numbers 6 and 7, we'll do the easy one first. You're on the board. Councillor Palashi.
By way of Alan's comments, windows and AC units aren't the issue. It's there's no 400 series highway near this subdivision, and I don't think it's under a flight path. So I know that windows and AC units, I understand, that they're kind of they're in kind of the agreements anyways, or so they should be, or so they can be. But usually noise studies are to the effect of 400 series highways or major highways and flight paths, which this subdivision isn't near. Thank you.
Somebody want to? Well, I would like some a staff response on what a noise study encompasses.
Yeah, Madam Chair, staff, we do require the noise studies where the sites are adjacent to arterial roadways. We often find that the arterial road traffic is such that it creates sufficient noise in order to necessitate noise walls, window upgrades, different AC units that operate with different decibel ratings. Yes, they apply in order to help mitigate the flight paths and 400 series highways. The arterial road traffic is also applicable as well.
Through you, Madam Chair, Councillor Gibson did request when he was speaking that there be separate votes on every one of the recommendations that were singled out. So my advice to committee will be, essentially there'll be potentially 4 votes. The first is to vote on deleting recommendation 7, which is the detailed noise study. The second is to vote on deleting recommendation 6, which is the traffic assessment. The third is to vote on recommendation 3, which is the environmental site condition and possible phase 2 environmental assessment work. And then the final vote would be voting on the balance of the recommendations as amended.
Is it deleting 3?
If recommendation 3 does not carry, then it's effectively deleting 3. Because through you, Madam Chair, when Councillor Palashi first spoke, his motion was to move the staff recommendations by deleting recommendations 7, 6, and 3.
But I asked for a separate vote on 3.
And then that has been superseded by Councillor Gibson's request to have a separate vote on all the proposed deleted recommendations separately. So the first vote will be, a recorded vote's been requested, a vote on deleting staff recommendation 7 in the staff report. All in favor, please stand to be counted. Showing in favor is Councillor Palashi. All opposed, please stand to be counted. Showing opposed is Mayor Jeffrey, Councillor Miles, Councillor Fortini, Councillor Bowman, Chair Moore, Councillor Dillon, Councillor Willens, and Councillor Gibson. Madam Chair, that motion carries 8-1. It loses 1-8, I'm sorry. The second motion is to vote to delete staff recommendation 6 regarding the traffic assessment. All in favor of that motion, please stand to be counted. Showing in favor is Councillor Palashi. All opposed to the motion, please stand to be counted. Showing opposed is Councillor Gibson, Councillor Willens, Councillor Dillon, Chair Moore, Councillor Bowman, Councillor Fortini, Councillor Miles, Mayor Jeffrey. Madam Chair, that motion loses 1-8. The third motion is to vote on recommendation 3, which is the environmental site assessment. All in and I believe
Removing it.
removing it. That's the intent of Councillor Paleshi's original request, so deleting recommendation 3. All in favor to delete recommendation 3, please stand to be counted. Showing in favor is Councillor Paleshi. All opposed, please stand to be counted. Showing opposed is Mayor Jeffrey, Councillor Miles, Councillor Fortini, Councillor Bowman, Chair Moore, Councillor Dillon, Councillor Willens, Councillor Gibson. That motion loses 1 to 8. The final motion is to vote on the balance of the staff recommendations, which effectively are all 10 staff recommendations. All in favor of the motion, please stand to be counted. Showing in favor is Councillor Gibson, Councillor Willens, Councillor Paleshi, Councillor Dillon, Chair Moore, Councillor Bowman, Councillor Fortini, Councillor Miles, Mayor Jeffrey. That motion carries unanimously 9-0.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clerk, for your work on that file. Thank you. Item 7.5 is the report from Claudia Larota, Policy Planner, on the city-initiated amendments to the zoning bylaw for second units. Councillor Fortini.
A couple of questions to staff.
Okay.
Claudia? To you. Thank you, through the chair. Claudia, just thank you for the report. Just wanted to ask, do we still have the $25,000 grant that the region gives out to basement apartments? Is it still active?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, it is still active. Right now, it applies to only existing units. They're working on a revised budget for new units, but as of now, yes, they're still standing. And it's up $25,000.
25. But my understanding is, going back about 6 months ago, the region was giving $25,000 to anyone that was starting a second unit, so long as they exceed, I think, $72,000 or $74,000 as an income. And now they switched it over to only existing, but back then, they were giving out.
No, it was always to existing units because it's basically to come up, the existing units will need to come up to code. So it's basically giving a grant for people that needs to upgrade existing units. And at that time, when originally we started, it was a pilot program for only 18 units, and there's a requirement that they need to satisfy. There's a requirement for, do you remember how much is it? 85,000 combined income, and they have added recently also how much the house cost. That's a new requirement. It didn't used to include that. That's a new requirement for the region. But it's still up to $25,000.
On the smoke stove alarms, do they have to have that? Is that under the provincial code, or just we're asking as a bylaw? Those are for, I guess, people that can't see or.
Through you, Madam Chair, the current code requirements speak to the types of smoke alarms that have to be installed. So it is the Ontario Building Code, and any time that you are changing the use of a dwelling into multiple dwellings or renovating a second unit like that, we would look at upgrading those smoke alarms to the current requirement. There are circumstances, depending on the rest of the house configuration and how the furnace is essentially connected between the two units. You may require interconnected smoke alarms between the two units, so that if one goes off, in dwelling 1, it goes off in dwelling 2. But there are other options to put in place. Rather than having the interconnected smoke alarms, you can have shut-offs in the furnace, automatic shut-offs in the furnace.
My understanding was those alarms were for someone for the hearing impaired. They can't hear. They flash the strolling.
Through you, Madam Chair, that's correct. The new smoke alarm requirements have both a strobe requirement and an audible requirement.
So that's on all buildings now?
Pardon me?
That's on all buildings requirement, high rises? Well.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. And the gas shut-off installed, the choker, even houses, if we have one furnace, how come all houses don't have it and only an apartment does? And that's $1,100, you need a gas
Yeah.
fare, that's another $800 to install, that's $2,000.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, the intent really behind that code requirement is that if there is a fire in Unit 1, that we don't circulate smoke to the second unit because they are sharing that furnace, right? So the idea is if there is any sort of indication that there's a fire in one unit, the furnace shuts off, the gas shuts off, there's no circulation of air from one unit to the other unit, so that you're not further impairing or spreading the smoke from one unit to the other. So it is intended to be a fire safety measure.
And once they do final inspection, how come they have to pay an extra $1,000? Which we're not told, and I got a couple of people, when I see them, I hide at the bakery because they want to shoot me, because all these things are all coming up as they're billing.
So, through you, Madam Chair, the best way to answer that is that the staff time that is put into reviewing these applications, inspecting these applications and the construction that goes along with it, and investigating the units that are illegal are not recoverable through the tax base. Staff in the building division are funded solely through user fees, and therefore, and this is through Bill 124, which came into place in 2003, I think, if memory serves me correctly. Essentially means that all of our staff are funded solely through user fees and not through the tax base. So every application that we have in the building division, we have to charge accordingly to fund the staff requirement for that. So those fees that are in place right now are based on the estimated staff time that was allotted to each of these applications.
See, so the $1,000, if someone's using it as a business, I could understand. At the end it gets deductible anyway, just like repairs. But if we have a young couple, 25, 30 years old, buying and trying to rent a basement to help them out, or even seniors to keep them in their home, I think we're over-exaggerating on charges. So we got to give these to the people that break. So we're giving them a $200 relief. We shouldn't give it to people using it as a business. We should give it more to the people, maybe give a little bit more to those people who really need it, like seniors. That's why they rent the basement, to stay there at the end of the day.
Through you, Madam Chair. It's to be quite honest with you, it's likely that we don't recover the full costs on these applications for the amount of staff time that's spent. But rather than say that, to put it in perspective, the amount that we're charging is likely roughly between 1 and 2 months' rent for the second unit. So it is quickly recovered by the homeowner once they have the unit up and running. We didn't see it to be cost prohibitive in consideration of the money that's made after the fact. But it is, if it is council's will, we will go back and look at the fees associated with our time spent.
On 7.3, it says you have to leave 1.2 meters or 4 feet to have an entrance. Is that from the property line, or that's why you need to put an entrance in?
If I may, through you, Madam Chair, that would be from the property line. The 1.2 meter clear path of travel must be accommodated entirely on the subject property.
And that would be, so you need 8 feet, almost 7 feet really, because you need 36 inch, 10 inch wall, 4 feet is almost 8 feet. So there's not many houses.
If the door is in the sidewall above grade, then it's 4 feet from the door to the property line. It may be paired with another property line that's 4 feet away. It could also be paired with a 2-foot side yard lot line.
I'm confused. If I have a fence and I got 5 feet between the fence and my wall,
Correct.
am I allowed to put a staircase going down?
A staircase going down? No. There's no recommendation to change the below-grade entrance provisions of the zoning bylaw. The only provision that we're seeking council approval and recommending approval of is the above-grade side entrances, where a landing is now required because it's the principal entrance to the second unit.
So we need more, you need 8 feet if we do it below ground,
Correct. Yes, you would.
and that's to get in the backyard.
That's correct. If you were to accommodate a below-grade side entrance, no change is proposed.
And what about if both sides have 5 feet and you only occupy one side, you can still enter the other side?
Both sides of the same dwelling or on
Same
both
house,
sides of the
got
property?
6 feet on one side, 5 feet on the other side. I could put stairs on this side, I can still enter from there.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, if the stairs and the setback to those stairs met the bylaw requirements, as well as the building code requirements for the width of the stair, it's possible that you
So we
could
still
have
need-
an access on both sides.
So we still need 8 feet.
You would
regardless.
still need 8 feet,
So-
likely to the side yard,
So
perhaps
what-
only 7.
So why are we approving houses when you have 2 feet on one side, and we say we have 4 feet on the other side, which we don't have 4 feet? Because when you put the hydro, you put your gas meter sticking out 16 inches, and you got over 3 feet air conditioner on the other side. How do they get back there?
That air conditioning units, number one, are not regulated through the zoning bylaw. Most houses, yes, have a 2-foot side yard and a 4-foot side yard, depending on the width of the lot. Sometimes they have 4 feet on both sides of the house. That's simply dictated through the planning approval process, through the subdivision review.
I've gone to subdivisions where there's 2 feet on one side, and then you got 4 feet on the other side, but when you put the air conditioner there, you only get less than a foot. So if the neighbor puts a fence there, which is allowed, how do I get in my backyard? I gotta use a 2-foot, barely fit.
That's correct. That would be a choice through you, Madam Chair, that the homeowner would make for themselves.
Okay, Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of really quick things. One of them is just words, and I don't know if we can change it, but in the background it says only 1 second unit is permitted per house. I would love to see that change to 1 additional unit, because once you put a second, the next one you put is a third, so it's not the second or the third or the fourth. And there's a lot of houses right now that are coming up with 3 or 4 units in their house, so I would like to see 1 additional unit rather than 1 second unit, if that's possible. But again, that's just housekeeping. The second thing is the proposed minor amendments to the zoning requirements are intended to provide more opportunity to register your second units. Is that really the case? Are we doing this to provide another opportunity, or, like, from what I'm seeing, and we'll see the report from Joe in a few minutes, we've given ample opportunities to people to register their second units, and they're not doing it. So is just cutting out the $200 fee, is that hopefully providing another opportunity to them that they're going to ignore too?
I don't think staff can say yes, but
Well,
we can.
okay, so, yeah. I'm just wondering, my question really is, do you think that getting rid of the $200 fee is going to be a big impact on people registering these units?
Through you, Madam Chair, the $200 fee and the refund of that or waiver of it, whether you've applied or not, it only applies to the legal non-conforming ones, of which there are about 350. Aside from that, do I think that will encourage people to come? It certainly might. It's always been a criticism from those folks who do want to legalize their legal non-conforming that they've already got the zoning in place. They shouldn't have to pay again for a zoning review. So it's possible that we'll get the rest of them out. Many of them have already come forward.
Okay.
Which is why the refund is required. As far as the other provisions that we're proposing and amendments that we're hoping you'll support, it does allow for more flexibility. A lot of the recommendations are based on criteria that would otherwise prevent a property from qualifying, such as the parking space size, where now we're recommending a slight reduction in the overall width of a parking space, so many of the semi-detached lots will now qualify. In addition, there's been a lot of controversy surrounding the limitation on the floor area associated with the second unit, and whether, if 45% is adequate, why not 46? Or do I really need to increase the size of my furnace room just to make my apartment smaller? So that provides a little more flexibility, particularly for the bungalows and the back splits, side splits, where it's really just very difficult to configure the unit in such a way that those percentages were maintained. Again, with the side entrance, the above grades only, and the allowing for a landing in the side yard. Right now, the bylaw doesn't permit that landing, comes too close to the side lot line. This will then allow them to honestly declare that to be the entrance to their second unit, whereas they might have had to reconfigure their dwelling some other way.
Okay, and so for the legal non-conforming, are we going to be contacting the ones that we know have not registered, or are we still just going to sit back and let them come to us?
We have already contacted them. They've
Good.
all been given notice, registered mail. We are planning after this to go back to those that have not responded and again advise them, providing them with the time frame following that if they do not come forward or advise us that they have converted it back to a single family unit, which some have. We will send that information forward to enforcement for their consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fortini, you're back on. Just remember, we're
So how high is-
speaking about the recommendations that
How
are
high is the
here.
landing you're asking for?
The maximum height of the landing
2
in
feet.
this instance will be 2 feet above the
feet.
ground, which the zoning bylaw defines as a landscape deck, and there's no need for a guard as well.
Right. This is for Rick here, one question. What are we doing? So is there certain areas we're not allowed to have basement apartments, or we're allowed everywhere?
There's no specific area, through you, Madam Chair, that would prohibit it. Every dwelling is assessed individually, and there may be some that don't qualify if they can't accommodate that third parking spot, or if they don't have the path of travel.
So you get my area where I live. I got 8 feet on one side, 7 on the other. I want a basement apartment. How are we going to control our sewer lines when we got all the extra water going in there because it's all flood? And this happened just on the weekend. Quite a few houses got flooded. So in the morning, you're going to have a rainstorm. You're going to have people take showers or laundry, double the capacity. How is their sewer lines going to hold it when we have a 6-inch sewer line? We don't have the double sewers like the new subdivision.
Through you, Madam Chair, the best answer that I can give is I don't really know. You're correct. There is going to be, in some cases, if you pick a street and every house on that street puts a second unit in, you're going to have double the effluent coming from every house in terms of the sewer. And those capacities of those sewers, would be determined or would have been designed based on an estimated density at the time that the subdivision was created. And in these cases, both the water and the sewer will fall under the purview of the region. And whether or not they are keeping tabs on their capacities, I can't speak to be quite honest.
Yeah. Well, I know the water pressure. You put a gauge on your tap. You put it at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, it's a 58 psi. You put it in the morning, it drops down to 12. The sprinklers don't even touch half the lawn. So you can't even, if you don't take a shower at a certain point, you have no water pressure.
Yeah.
Because we got half-inch lines.
Through you, Madam Chair, that's correct, yeah.
Just love it when you talk dirty. Councillor Fortini, would you like to move the recommendations in the report? All those in favor? That's carried, thank you. We now move, there are the minutes to the Brampton Heritage Board. They are here, they were in consent. We'll move now to the enforcement of second dwelling units. And Joe Pitari and Paul Morrison and John Avbar have all joined us today to answer what's sure to be a number of questions. Councillor Gibson. Councillor Bowman.
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Chair. I'm glad to see we've got the report so quickly. Joe, thank you for putting your group together and getting this done. I was surprised by some of the numbers, to be really honest with you. The amount 105% increase in calls for second units just since last year is incredible. Obviously, we don't have the staff to look after 105% increase, and we hadn't planned for that staff. So I believe one of your recommendations is that looking at a revision in the 2018 budget for staff. The one issue, or the one problem that I've got, and it's nobody's problem, it's a problem that goes higher than us, is the fact that the province will do nothing to help us out. And I know that you've got that here, Joe, and what I have an issue with is that you say we've tried it twice, so let's just leave it. I'm not going to leave it. I'm not going to leave it, nor should anybody leave it. We need to do something. If Chief Clark were here, he would be able to tell you about fires where he's gone in, where illegal units exist, dangerous situations exist. We've had illegal units where there's been 15 people living in one semi. In one of these days, there is going to be a terrible accident. God forbid. There is going to be a lot of loss of lives. there is going to be the death of a fire or an EMS person, and that's when people are going to stand up in the province and our MPPs, and they're going to go, gee, we should have done something to fix this. We've got to take care of this now before something happens. It's getting to a critical stage, and when we talk about numbers here, about 105% increase in calls about second units, this is just an epidemic happening, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And we've talked, Rick, in fact, we sent pictures back and forth over several days of a guy digging his foundation out of his garage. We had the people across the street taking pictures of it, and you see a guy digging up to the top of his head in his garage, and I will guarantee you he has nothing to support the dirt and any of the concrete on either side. And at some point, that's all going to fall in, and we're going to have a terrible accident. And basically, I mean, we sent bylaw over, and there's nothing we can do. A guy is up to his neck digging in the foundation of his house, and there's nothing we can do. This is crazy. I don't know what it is we're going to have to do here. Pull them out, but I don't know what we're going to have to do here. But I think we need some action on behalf of the province to allow us even a little more leeway to get into these places, to investigate these places, to shut them right down. I mean, if we've got a guy digging up to his neck in his foundation, and he's obviously not adhering to any particular laws or construction association guidelines, we should be able to shut those guys down, period, and fine them big time. I mean, and I mentioned earlier, we've given people ample opportunity to come forward and say, you know what, I've got an illegal second unit and I want to legalize it. And for one reason or another, cost, the time it takes, the aggravation they have to go through, they're not doing it. And like I said, this is the reason that I proposed to have this cross-functional team get together to try and find some way of solving this issue. And I don't know, we've met a couple of times. There seems to be a little bit of headway. But unless we break through and get someone to advocate for us at the province, this is going to continue to be an issue, like I said, until someone is killed or a lot of people are killed. Then everybody's going to say, oh, we should have looked into it. So I'm glad you did this. I'm glad that we're seeing these numbers, and I hope a lot of people take a look at these numbers, because I was shocked, actually, at the number of increase. I knew it was a lot, but 100%, 105% is more than I expected. So thank you for doing this report. I agree with your recommendations moving forward, that we're going to have to look at adding more staff to get into this. But I also think we need to start taking it real serious. Levying fines where we can, shutting down illegal construction where we can, and getting somebody at the province to take this up as a real issue for us. So thank you very much.
No questions, just...
Well, it's basically a question.
Okay.
Okay,
I'll ask Joe if you
do?
could respond.
I don't want to give up with the province, Joe. I don't.
Through the chair, number one, I want to thank council actually for the opportunity. It was only the second week on the job, but working collaboratively with a truly dynamic team across the city, looking at this, that allowed us to work quite quickly and nimbly to identify some of the service implications in doing that, and hence why we're able to come back so quickly, and allowed us to also bring that report back at the same time as Claudia's report that you just heard from. So thank you for that opportunity. It's been exceptional working with such great people. So, as noted in the report, if it is the desire for council for us to continue to lobby the province, we will of course do that. In preparation for today and developing this report, I did have face-to-face discussions, because clearly the historical sending the letters and not getting a response didn't work. So this time I took it upon myself to say, okay, I met with senior officials from Ministry of Attorney General, Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Services, as well as Municipal Affairs and Housing. I was going to get it straight from the horse's mouth and get at least some type of response. And the challenge for the province and for us in a sense is that providing us as a municipality the right of entry would be somewhat difficult for the province, given that the police don't have those types of rights. So to provide it to us would be problematic. We do have a process, as per their direction, for us to follow to get the warrant to have access to these, much like the police would. So that's where it becomes somewhat of a challenge for us to. We can continue to lobby, and hopefully, we get a greater support and cause. But given that there's already been recent changes to the legislation in this area, as well as under the Police Services Act, the likelihood of them opening it up again would be difficult. However, there could be a small sliver, dare I say, hope, in that we have another item that is facing municipalities across Ontario, and that is the legalization of cannabis. And that there's going to be a requirement to change the legislation, and I've been in discussions with the executive director of the secretariat that is charged with dealing with that for the province. And while there's still a lot of discussions going on and nothing has been set in stone, our hope is to continue to work again as a collective collaborative group across the city, but to then lobby the province, not just through AMO and FCM, but also ourselves with the Ministry of the Attorney General, to in fact attempt to get some type of further enhancement or support for us to get either quicker access to the types of warrants or access that would allow us to do that and maybe deal with it for second units at the same time or multiple units. So I've tried to deal with this prior to coming here, so I would have a response, but we can continue that. Happy to do that for council and for the city.
Okay. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Councillor Bowman's point, I believe there has been 2 deaths in basement apartments, not necessarily in Brampton, but in the region over the years, and it really surprisingly hasn't escalated like you would have thought it would. It was probably, unfortunately, going to take a whole family or a whole household, and then not only will the province, the cities, the people who own these things, and the people who live in them will then take notice of it, and that is really unfortunate. I know here we have beat our heads against the wall trying to deal with just the safety issue of it alone, when our constituents want us to deal with all the things we can't deal with, like taxation and all that kind of stuff. The good news is we have this here now in front of us. It's a step forward. Bad news is when it comes to budget, we'll be having this discussion. And but to me, this is a really good step forward. It's long overdue. And I'm certainly going to support it in budget because I think it's what we have to do. I do have one question, though. When it comes to prosecution, how are we going to ensure that we get the right prosecutors or prosecutor? Because you could have difference of opinions when you get in front of each prosecutor. Is there a way we can find, I wouldn't say a lenient, but not a lenient,
through the chair.
Where somebody is going to understand the severity of the problem and get the prosecutor that we need to have.
Through the chair, Councillor Gibson, you flagged something that I think is important and part of developing that governance model and the resource requirements for the 2018 budget on this issue. One thing we didn't identify in this report, but you have clearly articulated, part of that interdepartmental enforcement team or task force, I think would also have merit to have a specialized prosecutor as part of that team to be in step and in sync with the rest of that task force to be able to have that consistency that you're talking about. So that would be part of the ask in the 2018 budget.
I think that's really important because each prosecutor would have their own things that they're good at, things that they're not so good at. And I think we need to make sure we have a prosecutor in place that's So when we're in front of them, they understand the severity of this. Okay, great, thank you very much.
Councillor Dillon.
Just a couple quick questions. Do you have a breakdown of the requests of the wards in which the requests were made, and a breakdown of the wards in which the investigations were done?
Sorry, through the chair, was that a question? Do we have that?
Yeah, like can we see where, like you said, it went up 100%. Can we have a breakdown of where they are in the city?
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't have that information right now. We could probably find a way to retrieve that.
Yeah, I think it'd be, you can see some trends. Try to figure out where some of these areas are, and perhaps if they need help, we can maybe lobby for some assistance or something. But if you can provide that, that would be good.
I'll look at that.
Just a couple of questions I had as well. Just from my own information, when you say, it says reasonable grounds to suspect contravention of zoning bylaw. When you say reasonable grounds, what does that mean?
Through you, Madam Chair, reasonable grounds for the purposes of investigating a second unit, we would have to have firsthand information, information from tenants, former tenants, lease agreements, something to that nature that indicate that there is a second self-contained unit at that property.
Okay, thank you. And last question is, when a file is closed, say for example, there's a second unit, I guess the definition of a second unit is they have like a stove and all that. If they remove that type of stuff, you guys come to agree to that, they remove it, you come in, inspect it, file is closed. Can the city at any time re-access that unit, or do they have to go through the process again if there's a complaint made?
Through the chair, we don't have access to reattend. We would have to make the same request, right of entry through the Planning Act, where we would need permission to enter.
Right, and just one final comment is that I think there needs to be, my own observation is that I think we need to have more stringent complaint process. We've got a lot of people where nothing's been found, but somebody wants to make a complaint because for some reason they just want to get back at that person, or they just don't like the person, so they're complaining on every little thing. So maybe I'm unaware, but is there some online process where they can fill out their name, address, etc., so at least there's some credibility to the complaint?
Through you, Madam Chair, the officer is usually in contact with the complainant to try and ascertain some details as to why they believe a second unit exists, understanding the points that some of your counterparts have made today. The safety issue is paramount when it comes to these issues. We're not comfortable in just walking away from a potential complaint. We're going to investigate it as fully as possible with the least impact. I've never been confronted with a situation where a second unit didn't exist, where we were strongly turned away. Most people are willing to comply, understand what we're trying to do. We explain it as best as we can, why we're there, and the need for this type of enforcement. In those cases, we're generally allowed in to inspect, to 5-minute inspection in those cases.
Is there a minimum criteria that you require, or can I just anonymously call and say, XYZ on this street?
Through Madam Chair, no anonymous calls, no. We do have to have a legitimate complaint and that kind of information as to why they believe. I think I've mentioned on previous occasions, we do get a lot of complaints for, there's 5 cars in a driveway and somebody uses a side door, therefore there must be a second unit. We understand the optics of these things. However, we do have an obligation to follow up to make sure that everything is in compliance with the zoning bylaw.
Thanks, Len. I just want to say I do agree with some of the sentiments around at the table that when it's a safety issue, we have to do our best to make sure that we keep our residents safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fortini.
Joe, thank you. I know it's hard to get a search warrant or enter. It's impossible. Can we hook up, let's say, with the school board? Because I got some areas of people, residents in Ward 8, that live there 10 years or 12 years, pay their taxes, bring their kid to school and say, oh, we can't take them because we're capped. And meanwhile, they got to drive their kids somewhere else after because there's so many basement apartments. Can we work with the school board and see what we can do? Maybe say, you live at this certain place and it's not registered and, because it's very unfair for someone who pays the taxes, and maybe that might help a little bit too.
Through you, Madam Chair. Probably not, and I'll tell you why, is we'd probably have to bring in the school board to be witnesses in any prosecution we're going to use there for the disclosure of the information, and I don't think anybody would agree with us to go and do that. We have to be careful on our evidentiary gathering, because any evidence we get, we have to disclose to the courts, and we would disclose to school boards, and I think some of the perception of school boards telling this information to us might be misconstrued as something negative.
Yeah, I got some residents very upset saying, I can't take my child across the street, just down the street, because they're capped at 360 kids, and I got a driver, or I got to have a daycare now because we're going to lose time from work, and I live here and I pay taxes.
Absolutely, and that's why we're endeavoring to respond to as many of these types of calls as possible.
Thank you.
Councillor Miles.
Thank you. This is a step forward. This is a really positive step forward. So I'm really glad to see that we are going to do something and that we're going to try and use every resource that we can possibly identify to bring this under control. So can you just tell me? So how many people?
Better look the other.
How many families can live in a house legally?
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't know that you can really define how many families are permitted to live in a house. There are a lot of considerations when you ask that question. Are those families living there and paying rent to somebody else who owns the house, or are all those families a single housekeeping unit, just several generations of families? So it's a very subjective statement to call somebody family, right? We have rules around lodging homes. We have rules around tenancy. So if you can only create one second unit in a dwelling, and within that dwelling, and Elizabeth, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you can have 3 people paying rent. So you could have 3 lodgers in a dwelling, right? Before it becomes considered a lodging home. So you could have one person paying rent and then splitting that rent with 2 of his buddies, for instance, right? Similar to student housing that you see in Waterloo, which of course is going to become a reality for Brampton, hopefully in the near future. So I don't know that you can put any sort of wording around limiting families per se in a dwelling unit, but there are certainly limitations to how many renters or how many people paying rent you could have.
Okay, so as many generations of a family can live within a house as long as they're not living separate.
To the best of my knowledge, I think that's accurate, yes.
Okay. But you've said that you can only have 3 lodgers?
That's correct, yes. Elizabeth, would you be able to help identify that in terms of the zoning bylaw requirements?
Thanks. Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, the zoning bylaw defines a lodging house as a single detached dwelling with more than 3 lodgers or lodging units. And really the key to that is that there's a limitation on the areas that those residents can use within that dwelling. So they would have some areas where they have a keyed entrance into their own bedroom, let's say. And then they would share accommodations of the kitchen and perhaps the washroom facilities. So that's when it becomes a lodging house. And really to Rick's point in defining family is no longer a term used in our zoning bylaw. The bylaw speaks to single detached dwellings, semi-detached dwellings, and then defines what a dwelling unit constitutes. So if it does in fact operate as though it's a single housekeeping unit, regardless of how many people are there, as long as there's no exclusivity of use of certain portions of the dwelling, then it is simply a single family dwelling for all intents and purposes, and what we now define as a single detached dwelling.
So I had a friend of mine, actually lives in Ward 3 and 4, say that there's a house down the street where the owner of the house has actually got 15 students living in that house. And I know it was reported, so I'm assuming that you're dealing with that. But if any of the lodgers lets the city in, then you can go in and you can do what you need to do, correct?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, if we're granted access, we would have the ability to access certain portions of the home, presumably enough to gather enough evidence to state that there were multiple tenants in that building, and we would proceed with our investigation on that basis, yes.
So getting back to the issue with the fire department, then if a fire department goes in, is doing routine inspections, and sees something, they can report it to you. Can we then take it to prosecution?
It becomes a little more difficult than that because they go under a different authority than we do. So their information would just be supplementary to our investigation. So we would go back and we would probably, as we have done in the most recent history, gotten a search warrant, go back and then re-examine the unit to see if it's a second unit housing facility. And then we gather our own evidence. We have one that we had just charged on, one we just obtained a search warrant on. We did that. We did that in cooperation with the fire department and with the buildings. So we can't go in and stand alone on their information or their investigation. We have to detach ourselves because they have a different right of access than we do.
Still have evidence, though.
Partial
if
evidence.
you're going to take it to court, hopefully you're taking it to court because you have evidence that there is a second dwelling unit.
Well, their evidence would be mostly related to the fire safety aspect of the building, where our evidence is more the construct of the building, including 220 for the stove, 220 amp service for the stove, our service for the stove. We look at locked doors, etc. So our evidence is different. It's complementary. Theirs is complementary to ours, but not sufficient enough to stand alone in front of a justice.
Okay, so maybe this sounds a bit far-fetched, but could we not, I mean, if we're serious about this, and for me, the bigger issue now is these multi-family units and what's really it's a business that is spreading throughout the city with multi-individuals, multi-family dwellings, whatever. So if we can't gain access, can we not find other means of proof, like pictures? Could we not hire a number of investigators that would actually investigate, take photographs, talk to the neighbors, compile evidence, especially in situations where it's these bigger issues of concern? Like I've had people call me and they said, I just called the city and I'm so mad. I can see the guy putting the wall up, separating through the front window. And
Absolutely. Through Madam Chair, absolutely. But the circumstances around that may not be factual in the sense that it may not be a second unit. It may be putting a wall up to keep their mother-in-law or a mother separate, whatever it may be. So we actually have to get into the residence to evaluate and determine.
Why do you have to get in?
Because most of our factual evidence that we're going to supply to courts would be based on what we find inside.
So is there not can you not do things a little bit differently? Like just because it's always been that way? Can we not try it a different way? Like gather the evidence, have affidavits from neighbors, have whatever? We're restricted. Right of access is a restriction. A judge has got to get it. If there's enough evidence, we could gather different kinds of evidence rather than actually going in the house. Like telescopic lens on a camera.
I'm sure there's a Privacy Act thing there, but,
drones to follow them into the house.
Oh yeah, little drones. You could go in and take pictures. I know. We're in jest, but I'm not kidding. I'm actually talking about not saying if we can't get in, we can't do any kind of prosecution.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think that's essentially what this task force will be charged with doing, finding creative ways to gather the evidence. And because the less access we have, obviously, the more intense the investigation has to be, the more research that has to be done, speaking with people, gathering their testimony. So, when it comes to those situations where we can't get access, then, yeah, there's going to need to be a little bit more time spent, and hopefully this task force will be afforded that time, again, for a small component of what is really out there. And as I'm sure you've read in the report, there are supplementary ways for us to get at this, public education, community outreach. I think maybe we've got a better chance at getting access if we reach out to the tenants and say, is your apartment safe? If not, if you have a concern, contact us, let us in to have a look. So there are different ways that we're going to tackle this, but we do need the manpower to accomplish it.
I think public education is really, really important, and it's not public education so much about this is what you need to do to report your neighbor. Not that that isn't important, but I think it's tenants' rights, and let tenants know that they do have certain rights, and the steps that they can follow. The fact that they're going to be evicted is not a good thing. So anyway, thank you for the work you've done so far. Sit down, Michael. Thank you for the work you've done so far, and I look forward to the continuing saga, because that's what it is. It's a saga. Thanks.
Okay. Mayor Jeffrey.
Joe, in your team, have you talked to the insurance industry?
Through the chair, we did have some preliminary discussions with not directly with our insurance, with our internal insurance team, with Deb Trapona, yes.
So through you, Madam Chair, you might want to engage the private sector, because at the end of the day, when you remove a load-bearing wall or you make substantive changes to your homeowner insurance can be voided. And I don't think most people understand that their asset that is providing them with income is under some threat if they have no homeowner's insurance. So my suggestion would be to engage the insurance industry, because I think fear can be a very powerful motivator. If you own a home and you've removed a wall or a load-bearing wall and the wall collapses or the floor collapses, you go back to the insurance sector, it will not be covered. And I think that's a powerful motivator to anybody who sees this as a moneymaker. My second suggestion is that we should continue to lobby, and AMO is just around the corner. So we have us going anyway, so I believe those who feel very strongly about it should sign up and come with us to AMO and delegate. At the end of the day, this is a policy change. You go and talk to other policy makers. Please excuse me, but the bureaucrats don't make the decisions. The policy setters do. So we should go to talk to other policy setters in order to demonstrate the concern that we have and how we want to work with the province to provide more affordable housing, but we want to do it safely and we need the tools to do so. So I will be going, and I presume some other members of council will be going, and I think it's worthy of a conversation, and I think the loophole that you bring in is one that is a very effective argument and really does require the tools to manage something that is coming at us very, very quickly. So I think that would be a very practical way to resolve it, and we've got 2 months to prepare an argument in order to do that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fortini?
Thank you, through the chair. I just can't believe we can't find proof. You punch in a plate on my car, it shows my name. Punch on the other plate, it shows a different last name. Punch on the third plate, it's a different name. There's already proof. But look on the voters list. I was looking at them 2 weeks ago. There's 22 people in an area, Professor Lake, living in the house. That's people that are eligible to vote, 18 and older, in one house. So what else proof you got? They're right there.
He's chomping at the bit to respond.
Not through you, Madam Chair, but not to be argumentative, Councillor, but if I punch in your plate and it comes back 14 and I punch back another plate, and it comes back Bowman, and it comes back Medeiros. They could be son-in-laws. It could be anybody else. So that's the circumstantial. It gives us suspect that we should investigate more, but it doesn't give us factual evidence. So we're always looking for that factual evidence. We have one search warrant now that we've completed. We have the investigative side of it, and we'll be going for significant fines from it. Typically, we haven't sent the message out that we have a lot of teeth in what we do. Now we're going to switch gears, and we're going to show people we mean business. We're going to come after you. We're going to come after your second unit housing, and we're going to hold you accountable for that. So that's part and parcel of what we're putting on the table today.
So, on the VOR's list, we can't do nothing when I'll bring them to you. I'll show you.
They're all assists. They're all great assists for us to gather our evidence. But in a court of law, my past experience has told me that the factual evidence is the best. The factual evidence is what we find within inside the house. So.
I just think it's got way out of hand now that there's too many that, where are we going to send them at the end of the day? And you get a court order, guy coming, you know it yourself. He comes to court with 3 kids. I said, you got to move. Okay, where do you want me to go? Where are you going to send the kids in there? At the end of the day, we got to provide. So at the end of, there's nothing really the courts are going to do.
And through you, Madam Chair, Councilor, I agree with you 100%, but I would hate to go to a lot of work and lose one in the courts and then have a setback and make it more difficult for us to do our work in the future. So we're recommending that we go down the prudent steps of doing the warrants, etc.
I'm still recovering from the fact that Fertini, Bowman, and Medeiros could all be related there. Councillor Bowman.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Very quickly, just one question, and I don't know who can answer it, but I know that we have had instances over the past couple of months where fire has gone in, put out the fire, there's been no injuries, there has been illegal second units in the places where they've put the fire out. Do we follow that up, and do we press charges at that point? Does fire share that information with the rest of the city, and do we then go after that homeowner for an illegal unit?
Through you, Madam Chair, once we are notified of an illegal second unit or potential illegal second unit in any property, we investigate and follow up and move forward from there.
Okay, so fire does inform you?
Through the chair, they have, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gibson.
I'll be very quickly. Can staff maybe send us all an email? I know we had a report, I don't know, it was the last term of council, the one before that, on things like, what is an accessory unit? I mean, it's not as easy as just to say, well, I saw so-and-so, I saw 10 people go into that house. That doesn't make an accessory unit. You can't prosecute on that. And maybe give us a little bit of information on what it takes to get a warrant, and what kind of information that the staff have to put in front of a prosecutor. So we all have a better and I know there was a report back there a few years back that explained all this stuff. So maybe we all have a better understanding of what you folks have to go through. Because it's clearly we don't, by some of the questions that, it's just not simple. It's not a simple thing. I know it's not. So I'd like to see that. And I don't know if we have to have it here at committee, but even an email might explain some of these stuff and might help educate some people. And if we feel we need more discussion, we can always add it onto an agenda and have some more discussion on it. Thanks.
Okay. I just have some random comments to make. I was making notes in addition to some of the ones I'd made. One is that a lot of the work that takes place putting in an access to the downstairs or another part of the house, it's done at nights and weekends. And I think we know that we don't necessarily have the right people on staff on nights and weekends to respond and actually issue the stop work order and do what needs to be done. So I flagged that as something that needs to be, even with our existing staff, that we need to organize them in such a way that they can respond, because sending my friend Rick Kennard an email on the weekend and saying, there's some neighbors going crazy because of some construction taking place is not really how we should be responding. The second is, the second units are, it's hard to believe I've been here 17 years and we've been complaining about them for 17 years, and I'm not sure we've made any measurable improvement. But what is really a phenomenon that's happening these days is the rooming house piece, and we've talked about that. But I've probably had 3 calls in the past week alone from neighbors who are concerned about the number of people who are occupying the house next door that's just changed hands and had a lot of construction done to it. So, and it is, if we don't sort of jump on that now, we're going to be talking another 17 years from now on the second units and the rooming house lodging houses. So that needs to be addressed. On the court orders, if we go through the process and we're successful with the warrants and having some large fines levied, are we able to, or what measures do we need to take to have those attached to the tax bill for the property in the event that they don't pay it? Because they're not going to pay it.
Through the chair, we would typically attempt to collect those fines. We can put liens on the property, so if it is ever sold, we could collect that way. Otherwise, it would go through a collection agency to obtain.
Well, I think that's an advocacy piece that we need to, as we refine the process that we use to try and bring these properties into compliance, when we do the advocacy piece with AMO, we need to have a list of things, of measures that they can introduce. Another question, as I said, I apologize for them being random. Is it appropriate, or do we do training for our prosecutors? Should we be running a training seminar on some of the complexities of and the consequences of the second units or the illegal rooming house lodging houses that are in, rather than take the chance of them sort of, their training and education is taking place by the number of cases put before them, do it at the beginning to sort of maybe flag some of the things that we would like them to consider when they're adjudicating a case that's before them. The other is, I sit on the IMEC committee, and one of the new members there, as you know, John, is the Ontario College of Trades. And they say they're coming into Brampton to do some major blitz around the kind of construction that's taking place, because electrical and plumbing, I think there was one other where, the usual contractors that come in, they're not using licenses. They're not using licensed tradespeople. And, of course, it might be part of their membership drive, I don't know, but they're saying that lives are being put at risk, health and safety issues, because they're not using licensed tradespeople to do the kinds of things that under the building code they are required to have. So I don't know how we engage them, how the interdepartmental enforcement team really is interdepartmental, interagency, because we do need to involve the police and College of Trades and others that may assist us to get this under control, maybe finally. And the last one I have is, do we know on an annual basis, and it goes to the advocacy piece again when we go to AMO and we talk to the other policymakers, how much is it costing the taxpayers in the region or in the city of Brampton on an annual basis with enforcement of second units? And I don't think you can pull it down to the last dollar and cents, but I think you can say 30% of our time, 40% of our time, and come up with a rough estimate of what is it going to cost. And if we move forward with this interdepartmental team and we hire the folks that we need to actually go out and do the kinds of enforcement and follow-up that we need to, including the cost of the prosecutors, I think it's a pretty big price tag. And, for those who are following the rules in the city. So I'd like to know, ballpark, when we go to speak to the ministers and we go to AMO, here's what it's costing the local municipalities because of a policy decision made at the province that the local taxpayers are paying for. And we know that we have millions of dollars sitting on the uncollected POA fees that have been levied. We don't need to keep adding to it because at the end of the day, it really is the taxpayers that are footing the bill. And that's all the comments I have to make. Thank you. Someone like to move the report? Councillor Gibson. All in favor? That's carried. The last item is a correspondence item that is on consent. Are there any questions from members of council? Seeing none. Public question period. There's nobody left. We bored them all. They left. There's no closed session. Motion to adjourn, Councillor Miles. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you.